Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the way in which a man appointed by Boris Johnson found Boris Johnson not guilty of corruption in his part in the £200,000 flat refurbishment that could still see him face criminal charges, and that is what makes this story worth pursuing. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So right now, Boris Johnson appears to be doing fine, but he's actually at sea in a rubber dinghy being circled by sharks. Dominic Cummings may or may not deal him serious damage when things next take a turn for the worse for him. I suspect a lot of that will depend on how serious he is, because he's going to need to provide some documentary evidence not currently in the public domain. But Johnson is facing other dangers too, not the least of which is the likely corruption in having Tory donors pay for his lavish flat refurbishment. And I do mean lavish. £200,000 for a relatively modest flat. To recap, the Prime Minister is permitted a budget of £30,000 to decorate their flat in Downing Street, their official residence. And that is generous by most people's standards. But I'm fine with that. That's okay. But that wasn't good enough for his extremely expensive taste, nor that of his fiancée, now dubbed Carrie Antoinette. It has become very difficult to find out exactly how much they have spent, because it's all been shrouded in secrecy. But piecing together a few things, not least of which is from the report into the affair that his stooge has just written, and journalists believe a figure of £200,000 is not unlikely. The scandal is alleged to be that rather than pay the extra himself, there's a lot of extra, Boris Johnson took the money from Conservative Party coffers. When this was discovered, a Tory donor covered the cost. Whatever the truth, what is known is that a Tory donor absolutely covered the cost. Now, there are some that will say, look, you know, the extra wasn't paid for out of public money. It was a private individual paying for it on a private arrangement. It's not a matter of public interest. Maybe there was some swindling of the Conservative Party, but that's a matter for them, not the public. But this is wrong. Why it matters is because Boris Johnson's government authorises the allocation of hundreds of billions of pounds of our tax money. And a distressing amount of that money goes to Tory donors. In fact, large Conservative Party donations are often, not always, but often less donations and more bribes. Many of the donors aren't giving that money away, it's an investment. It is absolutely vital that we know who paid what to the Conservatives or their ministers, who owes who a favour, and what they're getting in return in the form of public money. To attempt to hide either the donation or the award is corruption. And Boris Johnson attempts to hide at both ends. So what's happened now is that there are a few investigations going on. The first of which seems to have been concluded. Lord Geidt has carried out an investigation and produced a report. He draws a link between payment of the refurbishment and Conservative Party headquarters, plus Lord Brownlow, who is the Conservative donor, who was made a Lord for being a Conservative donor, and is the source of the funding for the refurbishment. Now, the author of the report, Geidt, was appointed by Boris Johnson. So immediately you would worry about the validity of any investigation carried out by someone appointed by the accused. As many have pointed out, imagine if you were being prosecuted but were allowed to pick a group of your friends to be the judge and jury. I can't imagine that the Crown Prosecution Service would have a very good record. So the report completely exonerates him, of course. However, never mind the conclusion, what was of interest to a lot of people was the content. First of all, it does state that the refurbishment was paid for by Tory donors. Initially indirectly, without their knowledge it seems, and then directly by someone willing to cover the cost. And here's the thing, actually, someone else brought this up, very good point. Here's what supposedly happened. Boris Johnson had a £200,000 refurbishment. He's allowed £30,000 of public money. The rest of it was stumped up by Tory donors. But apparently it's not corruption because Boris Johnson didn't know who paid for it. Now, a couple of things to say about that. The first of which someone brought up. So here's the situation. Boris Johnson organised that refurbishment. It's not civil servants that do it. It's not the Conservative Party that does it. It's his living space while he's Prime Minister and that of Carrie Symonds, his fiancée. Nearly called her Carrie Antoinette there again. And so they decided it was a private arrangement for them how it was going to be decorated. So then people came in and carried out that decoration, didn't they? People came in with the furniture they ordered, came in with the wallpaper they ordered, put up the wallpaper, made an arse of it, has to be put up again. All of that happened. Who did they send the bill to? Because initially they'd be giving that bill to the Prime Minister because it's his, he has to cover the cost. He's the one who gets the bill. He has to have passed that bill on to someone else. So to say he doesn't know who covered the cost is rubbish. But then the second point is this. When Keir Starmer asked Boris Johnson about this matter directly in Parliament a few weeks ago, Boris Johnson said that he had covered the cost. His exact words were, "I paid for the Downing Street refurbishment personally." But even this report, written by a man who was absolutely personally appointed by Boris Johnson, still reported that the refurbishment was paid for by a Tory donor, not Boris Johnson. So he also lied in Parliament. Again. But so far it just looks like another obvious cover-up that he'll get away with again. But there's a bit more spice to it than that. Because the report concluded that Johnson is not guilty of wrongdoing because he didn't know who paid for it, which is obvious rubbish that I've already explained. I mean, like, how do you get a £200,000 refurbishment of your flat and not actually know where the money came from? But also because Johnson said that he personally paid for it, it doesn't matter whether he knew where it came from or not. If anyone paid for it that wasn't the Prime Minister, regardless of whether he knew their identity or not, then he is guilty of a breach of the ministerial code at the very least. He has deliberately lied to Parliament, but that's not what's going to catch him out. He does that all the time. Some people noticed that the report was missing a lot of detail. It's one thing to draw spurious conclusions, but the report was extremely vague throughout. And a Dr. Seth Thefos, or however you pronounce it, I'm really bad at this, who is an academic anyway, he identified a probable reason. And it is almost certainly the reason. See, I talked about other investigations earlier. One is being carried out by the Cabinet Office. Cabinet Secretary is carrying that out. Another Johnson appointment who will toe the line. They're not supposed to engage in party politics, but that's just how it works these days. They do. They'll also find nothing to see here. But there is also an investigation by the Electoral Commission. And they have already stated quite clearly that there could be criminal offence in all this. They have actually contacted senior officials and says, you do not destroy any documents pertaining to this, or you could be up on a criminal charge. They're taking it seriously. And unlike the other two investigations, this one is independent as well. Now, I'm not saying there's no way to nobble it. Impossible to say that with a would-be dictator in charge of the country who will ruthlessly stop at nothing to preserve his power. But as far as things can be told at the moment, this investigation is genuinely independent and genuinely serious. And it's not just serious because it is independent, but because it could actually bring Johnson's downfall. As I've said before, if Boris Johnson is found guilty of providing misleading information regarding expenses under the Parliamentary Standards Act 2009, if he's found guilty, that doesn't automatically suspend him as an MP, but it allows his constituents to trigger his recall. A petition is issued. If 10% of registered voters sign the petition, then he will no longer be an MP. That's all there is to it. You're barred. Get out. He'd still be Prime Minister. And he would still be allowed to stand again in the resulting by-election. And there's every chance he would win that resulting by-election, although it's not the safest of seats. But the episode would be so damaging that surely even the Conservatives would not rally around him after that. And if they did, it would only make it all the easier for Labour to tar them all with the same Tory sleaze brush. So how much of a danger does this pose to Boris Johnson? Well, this academic noted that the report may have been light on detail because of the criminal investigation and a desire not to gift it with too much information that could be used against the Prime Minister. Because it's one thing to be perfectly upfront and frank about a load of things and then say that it doesn't actually matter when you are judge, jury and executioner. But there's a criminal investigation going on. Any information for them would be useful. Right now we have a Tory government that is so secure it feels no shame in admitting to the most terrible examples of corruption and just brazening it out. So why not just do that this time? Why put a cover-up on top of a cover-up? Because they really do feel that criminal charges could be forthcoming, and what's more, that if the full truth were known, that a conviction would be likely. Or, given the consequences, that a conviction at least runs a sufficiently high risk to take all possible action against it. This report by Lord Geidt was so lacking in details, it may well be that they are aware the details would be strong evidence for a prosecution. And a final thing to consider is that whether or not Johnson is eventually prosecuted and convicted, and I'm aware of how incredible that would seem when he seems to have such control over the authorities right now, but even if he gets away with this one, it's still damaging to the Conservatives. It's frequently reported that Conservative MPs build into their choice of leader these scandals. It's a price they pay in return for electoral success. They see Boris Johnson as a vote winner, but they understand that the scandals do them no good either. It's a hefty price to pay. And the second that those same Tories become unconvinced that it will be a sound investment come the next general election, he'll be gone. They've got no loyalty to him because they know he has no loyalty to them. They know he's a crap leader. They know he's a disaster in a crisis. And if some of the newer MPs didn't know before, they do now. He's in position because they believe he is a vote-winning machine. Let's see what happens when that is no longer the case. Not just for a few months, as was the case at the end of last year, but for an extended period of time. And if that happens, if the polls stop looking as rosy, you can expect not only fiercer attacks from the media when future scandals arise, and there will always be future scandals with Johnson, but you will also see his own backbenchers sharpening their knives as well. Of course, it would be a lot quicker and easier if he was just convicted of fiddling expenses, and that could happen this year. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.